everyone, I'm Natasha and I'm super excited to have you here with me today in the fourth class on my series on getting to know your watercolors. In this class, we'll be making these layered swatches where you can practice the very important watercolor technique of glazing or layering to help you see how you can build up layers of color in your paintings. Now, but hang on a second. You might be thinking, whoa, wait, fourth lesson in this series? Where are the other three? I haven't seen them. That's because they're over on Skillshare. I started this series on Skillshare, but I love teaching and I love sharing knowledge, and I decided that I'd be able to help more people by bringing this series over to YouTube. So if you would like to see those earlier Skillshare classes, please head to the description down below this video. You can use my Skillshare affiliate link to get a free trial. You can watch all the Skillshare that you can stand for, I think, 2 months right now is the current offer at the time of filming. So that's a whole lot of great value. You can check out the earlier lessons and check out everyone else's classes on Skillshare while you're there. So if you haven't watched the earlier classes, that is absolutely not a problem. You can jump right in with this one. Or if you'd like to go check those out first, I hope that you enjoy them, and I look forward to seeing you back here in this class again soon. So let's go ahead and jump right in and look at the materials that we're going to use to do this class here today. Alright, so let's take a quick look at the materials you will need. You will, of course, need a piece of watercolor paper. I highly recommend you have at least 140-pound paper that is cold pressed. That will help you be successful when you're practicing your glazing. It's very important to have nice, thick, high-quality paper, or else when you try to layer your paint, you're probably going to end up lifting your paint instead, which is the exact opposite of what you want. So if you're having trouble with this technique, take a look at your paper. I really recommend brands like Arches, Fabriano. This one here is Arches. This one is Kilimanjaro, which is the Cheap Joe's house brand of paper. Look for something that is a high quality paper. I have had very poor success with layering paints on Strathmore papers or like the little Moleskine watercolor sketchbook. It's a lot of fun to carry around. It is not good for layering. So very important for you to have your nice high quality watercolor paper. Then of course you'll also need some watercolor paints. For all the classes in this series, I've been using the Prima The Classics palette just because I know they're popular paints, and that way you can kind of get to know them better, see if there's something you might be interested in if you've been seeing a lot on social media about the Prima marketing watercolor paints. Also, you may want a watercolor palette. You don't have to have a fancy official palette. You can just use a plastic plate. You will need water. I love using lots and lots of water. I'm using a 2.5 quart paint mixing bucket from the hardware store. You also need watercolor brushes. I'll mostly be using this 8 round and 6 round, and plenty of paper towels. So, in the very first lesson in this series that you can find over on Skillshare, we looked at determining whether or not your paints are transparent. And layering paints is easiest with nice transparent watercolor paints. But as you can see from this set of swatches, from the third class on creating transparency swatches, the transparency of your paint really depends on the water to paint ratio. So even fairly opaque paints can become more transparent. So it's really handy if you have created transparency swatches to sit down and look at them just sort of for some ideas. We don't want the paint to be full strength like this for layering. We're going to be building up layers of less intense paint. So try to go for something that's more one of these mid-range values here when you're making your swatches to see nicer results. If you don't have this, don't worry, just mix up your paints as you normally would, go with it, see how things turn out. So over here I have roughly sketched out some little squares just to help me. I've put 8 even though I have 10 paints in my palette because I'm going to skip the white and the black. So what you want to do is begin by mixing up some paint I'm going to get some water in there. It's actually this color right here, so I'm going to bring it over. And I'm going to go ahead and just put this on dry, onto dry paper, wet into dry instead of wet into wet. And I'm going to come in, actually I'm going to grab a bigger brush. Have my paint all nice and mixed up there. And I'm just going to come in and fill this square with paint. Roughly fill this square with paint. Doesn't need to be exact. Okay. It's always very important to rinse your brush thoroughly. I like to use my paper towel. You'll see me do that in the other classes as well if you stop by, to make sure that my brush is good and clean. Now I'm going to do this exact same thing across the page here. I'm going to get that drop of water. I'm going to do the exact same thing across the page here, just painting in all of my squares, one color per. I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video to save you some time, and I'll meet you back here after I've painted all these squares. So I have some swatches here all done out, and I'm going to wait for them to dry completely. It's very important to make sure your paint is completely dry on your first layer before you go adding paint on top. Now, it doesn't particularly matter if it's just swatches, but I had a very traditional watercolor teacher, and she insisted you should never touch your painting with your hand like this because it can get your finger oils on your painting. So I think it's just a good habit to get into, to check with the back of your hand. And if it feels cool to the touch, then your paint is still wet. So you can speed this process up by setting your swatches under a ceiling fan, or even bringing out your hairdryer if you'd like, but go ahead and wait for your first layer to dry completely, and then I'll meet you back here and we're going to actually start layering or glazing a second layer of color on top. Okay, so I know that my swatches are completely dry, so now we're going to get into the layering or glazing. Now, when you're layering in watercolor, it's important to not overwork things. If you add a bunch of water and you start scrubbing back and forth, you're gonna mess things up. So just get in and get out. So I'm gonna use my number 6 for this part, and I already have some pretty good pink here. So I'm just gonna cover up half of my previous swatch. I'm trying to get my paint approximately the same level of pigment as before, and I'm going to come in and go from corner to corner like that. And I'm going to try not to overwork it. It can be difficult sometimes because I like to try to make everything perfect. And there we have it. So you can already see that obviously the second layer is going to be more vibrant than the bottom layer, or darker if it's a dark color. So this is the beauty of transparent watercolors. You can keep layering on. If you're using an acrylic paint that's really opaque, then you can't do this. It's one of the super cool things about watercolor paint. And you don't have to do this with the same color on top of the previous color. You can do this with different colors. You could layer your, blue on top of your green and see what you come up with. but that's not what we're going to be doing today. So just like before, I'm going to work across the page, adding a second layer of color, and then I'll meet you again at the end of this glazing. All right, and there we have it. We've gone and added a second layer of color on top of their match from the previous pass of swatching. And it's really cool because you can see the impact of glazing or layering and why it's such a popular watercolor technique that allows you to build up vibrancy. It's also great if you're trying to contour something in a painting to add depth and realism by adding shadows or leaving highlights when you use this layering technique. So like I said, it's a super essential watercolor technique to know. I really hope that you've enjoyed this quick little demonstration of how to create some layered swatches to practice your glazing and to get to know what to expect from your watercolor paints. As I mentioned before, if you'd like to see the other classes in this series, the earlier classes, please stop by the Skillshare link down below in the video description. You can see the first 3 classes there, and I will be adding future classes in the series here on YouTube. I also invite you to stop by my blog at www.natashalh.com, also linked down below, for more watercolor fun and weekly crafting tutorials. And also please, in a comment on my blog or here on this post, if there's anything, any watercolor technique you would like to see me cover in an upcoming class, please let me know what that is so I can try to cover it for you. So thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.